Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening the file on a story that, while it's been in the public eye, it really serves as one of the most chilling and just devastating warnings about the unforeseen consequences of extreme, sudden wealth. We are focused entirely on the life and death of Abraham Shakespeare, a man whose good fortune, his incredible luck, ultimately became the very instrument of his tragic fate.
It really is an unbelievable story.
Abraham Shakespeare was born in 1966, and for, most of his adult life, he maintained a pretty humble existence. He was a truck driver's assistant in Lakeland, Florida. And that reality, that sort of quiet life and the peace that came with his anonymity, it just shattered. It shattered entirely in 2006 when he won the Florida lottery jackpot.
That win is the fulcrum. It's the point upon which his entire life just violently pivoted. So our mission today is to conduct a really thorough deep dive into the source material that you've provided and to document precisely how Shakespeare went from being this ordinary working man to a victim of systematic exploitation and murder, all in less than 3 years.
It's just an incredibly short timeline.
It is. And the facts are brutal. He won $30 million. He opted for the immediate $17 million lump sum cash payment in 2006.
Right.
By 2009, he was reported missing. And then, in one of the most grotesque acts of concealment you can imagine, his body was discovered in 2010.
The profound tragedy is just undeniable. A life that ended not by chance, not by accident, but purely because he was targeted, stalked, and then eliminated for the immense monetary value he represented. So we really need to follow this intricate and shocking timeline of deceit. We've got to start with the immediate and often overwhelming negative consequences that just erupted the second he signed those lottery papers.
And we should name the key antagonist right away.
Yes.
Doris Dunnigan Moore, known as Dee Dee Moore, the woman who inserted herself into his life and ultimately became his killer.
It's so vital to frame this narrative not just as a true crime story, but as an exploration of the corrosive power of money itself.
That's exactly it. The instant he transitioned from Abraham Shakespeare, neighbor, to Abraham Shakespeare's $17 million, the sources show that the entire nature of his human relationships just warped beyond repair.
He became a prize.
He became a prize. And that transition, as we're about to see, created this profound vulnerability that Dee Dee Moore recognized and just ruthlessly exploited.
So let's start at the beginning, the day that changed everything.
We begin on November 15, 2006. Abraham Shakespeare, he was 40 years old at the time, and he was on a work trip headed toward Miami with his coworker, a man named Michael Ford. The location was a Town Star convenience store in a small town called Frostproof, Florida.
And the mechanics of the win are so deceptively simple, but they instantly created the first major conflict that really signaled the end of his piece.
Right. Ford stops the truck. He goes in to buy cigarettes and drinks. And Shakespeare just asks him, hey, can you buy me 2 lottery tickets? He hands over $2. Just a small, everyday transaction.
A $2 transaction that yielded a $30 million jackpot.
And that $2 purchase led to immediate, intense litigation. As soon as Shakespeare claimed the prize and chose that $17 million lump sum, Michael Ford, the co-worker who bought the ticket, sued him.
On what grounds?
Ford claimed that Shakespeare had actually stolen the winning tickets directly from his wallet. He demanded at least $1 million of the winnings.
It is truly staggering to consider that pressure. I mean, before he could even process the reality of being a multimillionaire, he's immediately immersed in a high-stakes legal battle.
He's in depositions, in courtrooms. He has to defend the legitimacy of his own good fortune before he's even had a chance to enjoy it.
That must have been just an awful experience.
And the documents confirm this wasn't just some threat. It was aggressive, immediate litigation that dragged on for nearly a year.
A full year.
A full year. A jury eventually did rule in Shakespeare's favor in October of 2007. They decisively rejected Ford's claim. But the emotional damage, that was already done. The win established a very clear precedent for Shakespeare. His wealth was a magnet for conflict and for predatory behavior.
When we look at how he spent the money initially, it doesn't really fit that cliche of the lottery winner, buying islands or private jets. So how did the sudden wealth actually manifest in his day-to-day life?
And that's a crucial point that separates Shakespeare from so many other tragic lottery stories. I mean, relative to a $17 million cash payout, his lifestyle changes were surprisingly modest. It really suggests he was aiming for stability and privacy, not, extravagance.
Okay, so what did he buy?
He did move out of his old working-class neighborhood in Lakeland. He bought a beautiful but not palatial $1.1 million home in a gated community.
An attempt to buy some privacy.
An attempt, perhaps, to insulate himself from the public, yeah.
And what else?
His other reported major purchases were, well, they were limited. A basic Nissan Altima and a Rolex watch that he bought from a pawn shop.
From a pawn shop.
And if you compare that list to this vast pool of $17 million, it really speaks volumes. He wasn't frivolously spending. He was trying to buy some space and security.
But the security that gated community offered was, well, it was superficial compared to the emotional and psychological attack he was suffering from the outside world.
Absolutely. This is where the sources transition from documenting financial transactions to capturing profound distress. Friends and family consistently reported that Shakespeare was just utterly overwhelmed. He struggled immensely with what is often called sudden wealth syndrome. His life was now defined not by his character, but by his bank account.
And that meant everyone wanted a piece of it.
He was facing constant, relentless appeals for money. These pleas came from cousins he hadn't spoken to in decades, strangers with elaborate business ideas, people seeking help with medical bills.
And what the police called hangers-on.
Exactly. The volume and the intensity of it all were psychologically devastating for him.
The sources reveal a just heartbreaking articulation of this burden, the kind of insight you rarely hear from a lottery winner.
Yes, the quotes are truly poignant. He reportedly confided in his own brother, lamenting, and I quote directly, "I'd have been better off broke." Wow. This wasn't hyperbole. It was a deeply felt conviction that the loss of his peace, of his old life, outweighed the value of the money.
He conveyed a similar sense of isolation and betrayal to a childhood friend, too.
He did. He told that friend, "I thought all these people were my friends, but then I realized all they want is just money." And this feeling of being reduced to a walking ATM machine, it created this profound emotional isolation. He was desperate for someone to manage the chaos, to shield him from the constant solicitation.
And that desperate need created the exact vacuum that Dee Dee Moore would so skillfully fill. That brings us directly to the introduction of the key antagonist, Doris Donegan Dee Dee Moore. This is the transition from that general amorphous threat of sudden wealth to a highly specific, focused scheme of financial and personal ruin.
Moore arranged to meet Abraham Shakespeare in October of 2008. The timing, as we noted, is critical here. This is nearly 2 years after the win.
So he's been worn down. Exactly. 2 years of constant harassment and legal pressure had worn Shakespeare down completely, and Moore's alleged intent was, on the surface, innocent enough. She claimed she wanted to write a book about his experience as a lottery winner.
A book project. That seems like the perfect, appealing distraction for a man who is just tired of managing his own stressful life. But her background suggests her intentions were predatory from the very start.
We have to establish her modus operandi immediately. Moore was not simply desperate, she was a seasoned, theatrical financial criminal.
What do the sources say about her past?
The sources confirm she had been convicted back in 2001 of insurance fraud and falsely reporting a crime. She got probation for that.
Okay.
And more significantly, she had filed for bankruptcy in 2002. So this history, it establishes a pattern. Financial trouble, followed by elaborate, deceitful schemes to acquire money and avoid any consequences.
She approached financial problems like a theatrical production. That's a great way to put it. So when she met Shakespeare, she wasn't interested in his story. She was interested in his liquid assets. The book project very quickly, transitioned into full-scale financial control.
And how did she achieve this control so swiftly? What was the mechanism she used to legally gain access to his funds?
She engineered a legal structure that gave her immediate, unchecked power. She established a business with Shakespeare, an LLC called Abraham Shakespeare, LLC.
A limited liability company.
Correct. And crucially, she designated herself as the firm's controller. This gave her sweeping access to and control over the company's funds, which of course were Shakespeare's funds.
So this sounds like a sophisticated legal shell game. It was designed to make the exploitation look like a legitimate business arrangement.
That's precisely right. This was not simple theft. It was complex fraud shielded by corporate language. And once she had the keys to the kingdom through that LLC, the systematic stripping of his wealth began with shocking speed.
What was the first move?
Moore immediately withdrew a full $1 million from the company funds. She justified this as necessary business expenses, or later, she just claimed it was a gift.
A gift to herself.
A gift to herself. And the spending spree that followed was entirely self-serving.
Can you detail the major assets she acquired using Shakespeare's money?
The asset strip was aggressive. It was aimed at improving her own lifestyle and the lifestyle of her associates. She purchased a 2009 Hummer on March 2, 2009, that was about $90,000.
Okay.
She bought a 2008 Chevrolet Corvette for her boyfriend on February 21st, 2009 for just over $70,000. She also acquired a truck for herself, and then she took a vacation.
These high-value personal purchases, they just underscore that her sole motivation was immediate personal enrichment. It had nothing to do with managing Shakespeare's lottery problem.
Not at all. And this rapid financial depletion leads us to the most critical asset transfer, which was her acquisition of his primary residence, his home.
This is the big one.
The transfer of property is the definitive move. On January 9, 2009, the ownership of Shakespeare's $1.1 million home was legally transferred to a company called American Medical Professionals,
Which was Doris Moore's company.
which was her company. This move essentially guaranteed that she acquired his biggest asset while creating a financial fog around the entire transaction.
She claimed, of course, that this was a legitimate sale. What did she tell investigators regarding the payment for the house?
Moore insisted she had compensated Shakespeare fairly. She claimed she paid him $655,000 for the property and also covered another $185,000 in outstanding loans that he owed to other people.
But the police investigation
Found absolutely zero evidence that Moore ever transferred any cash to Shakespeare for the home.
So it was just a paper transaction.
Not only that, but Polk County financial records painted an even clearer picture of the shell game. These records revealed that Moore's company still owed Shakespeare more than two-thirds of $570,000 that was legitimately owed to him overall.
So she was effectively using the property transfer to accumulate massive unpayable debt in his name, strip his major asset, and leave him financially ruined, all while she retained control of the physical house.
Precisely. And by the time the sheriff began investigating in early 2010, the statement was definitive. The lottery money, quote, is gone now. Shakespeare had been financially wiped out months before his body was even found.
So the financial ruin really sets the stage for the murder.
The evidence strongly suggests that. Once Abraham Shakespeare had been stripped of his assets, his money, his house, his vehicles, Moore saw him as nothing more than a liability, a loose end that needed to be permanently silenced to protect her ill-gotten gains.
When do detectives believe the murder actually occurred?
Shakespeare was last definitively seen alive in the Lakeland area in early April of 2009. Detectives placed the date of death very specifically, around April 6 or April 7, 2009, and they believe it happened at a single-story ranch home in Plant City.
And this date is corroborated by a crucial piece of forensic evidence.
Yes. His cell phone usage stopped completely on April 6, 2009. That's a common, immediate indicator of a non-voluntary disappearance. The phone just goes silent.
Yet his family didn't report him missing until much, much later. Why was there such a long delay?
That 6-month gap until November 9, 2009 is entirely attributable to Moore's successful narrative control. She'd convinced his family and his friends that Shakespeare, fed up with all the harassment, had finally achieved the peace he craved by simply fleeing town.
Plausible, given what he'd been saying.
Very plausible. She suggested maybe he went to the Caribbean or some other distant haven. And it worked because it lined up with his previously expressed desire to be better off broke.
But the cover-up attempts, her attempts to hide the crime, they began immediately following that presumed date of death in April 2009.
They were immediate and premeditated. Almost instantly, Moore contacted her ex-husband, a man named James Moore, and she asked him to perform a very strange task.
What did she ask?
She asked him to dig a large, deep hole in her yard. She claimed it was for burying trash and some concrete debris.
A hole for trash.
That was her story. And James Moore's testimony was chilling. He dug the hole she requested. He stated he left and then returned about 2 hours later to fill it back in. But crucially, he noted that it was far too dark by then to see what contents, if any, had been placed inside the hole during the time he was gone.
And investigators believe that was the initial burial site.
The initial temporary burial site, yes, before she moved the body to the more permanent location at the Plant City property. This detail just speaks to the high level of forethought she employed.
The ultimate discovery, which happened 9 months after his death, was due to a critical break in the case.
It was. The breakthrough came in January of 2010. It followed a tip-off from a witness who was close to Moore. This led investigators to that single-story home she had purchased in Plant City.
The property she had cunningly put in her boyfriend's name.
Exactly, further distancing herself from direct ownership.
And a method of concealment at that final site, demonstrates an extreme level of effort, an effort to ensure the body was never, ever found.
It speaks volumes about the premeditation. On January 27, 2010, after days of digging, investigators located Shakespeare's body.
And he was buried.
He was buried 9 feet deep under a newly constructed concrete slab in the backyard.
A concrete slab?
Yes. This was not a hurried disposal. This was a calculated, sustained effort to create a permanent sealed grave. The sheer logistics of digging 9 feet down and then pouring a concrete foundation over the top. It suggests an absolute certainty that she had committed the perfect crime.
He was formally identified 2 days later. The truth was out, but Moore had been actively maintaining her web of deceit for 9 months. And that phase between Shakespeare's disappearance and the discovery of his body, it is a masterclass in manipulation. Dee Moore was extraordinarily committed to keeping the illusion of Abraham alive and communicating.
She had to. She had to manage the narrative to secure her total control over his remaining affairs.
What was her first line of defense?
The first line of defense was the story she told everyone, that she had simply helped him flee the burden of wealth. Before the body was found, she offered a constantly shifting array of explanations to police and to his family.
Where did she say he was?
Oh, he was in Texas, then he was in Jamaica, then Puerto Rico, or Orlando, or maybe he was sick and recovering in some hospital somewhere. The sheer variety was intended to sow confusion and distract investigators by creating this massive, impossible geographical search area.
But she moved beyond just storytelling to actively impersonating him. She even moved into his $1.1 million house.
The one she had fraudulently transferred to her company. Yes, she took over his life completely. She moved into Shakespeare's home and began using his cell phone to send messages to his friends and his relatives, posing as Abraham.
She needed to simulate continuity in his life.
Exactly. And this is where her scheme began to fracture, thanks to a deeply personal fact about the victim. This detail became Moore's most critical and ultimately fatal oversight.
What was it?
Absolutely critical detail. Abraham Shakespeare was illiterate. He could not read or write. This fact was well known to his friends and family.
So the text messages she was sending?
The messages, which contained correctly spelled words, proper sentence structure, complex phrases, they immediately sounded suspicious to those who knew Abraham's simple verbal communication style. He just didn't talk like that.
And when they texted back?
And when family members would text back with questions that required complex responses, Moore, unable to maintain the ruse or mimic his conversational cadence, she just stopped responding.
Which would have just heightened suspicions.
It did. It heightened suspicions that the person on the other end of that phone was not Abraham.
The manipulation even extended to his mother, Elizabeth Walker. She struck right at her emotional core.
Moore understood the power of emotional artifacts. In December of 2009, still posing as Shakespeare, she composed a card to his mother, claiming he was safe and fine.
A handwritten card.
A card. And to add an extra layer of tragic theatricality, she paid Shakespeare's cousin, a man named Cedric Edom, to deliver this card, along with a cross.
Implying that Abraham was thinking of his faith in his family during his supposed escape.
Exactly. She used the cousin to give the whole exchange a false veneer of legitimacy.
She also attempted to buy false testimony from the mother of one of Shakespeare's sons.
That was an attempt to provide an ironclad, documented false sighting. Moore offered the mother of one of his 2 sons a $200,000 home.
Using the money she had stolen from him.
Using his own money? Yes. If that individual would lie to detectives and state on the record that she had seen Abraham recently, it just shows the extreme lengths she would go to in order to craft a plausible alibi.
And we know she successfully paid at least one friend, Gregory Smith, to actively participate in the cover-up.
Yes. Moore paid Gregory Smith, who was a friend of Shakespeare's, to make phone calls to Elizabeth Walker, to his mother, pretending to be her son.
So she was getting others to impersonate his voice.
She was. Smith made these fraudulent calls in late December 2009, which further confused the missing person timeline. But as the investigation tightened, detectives approached Smith. He made the decision to cooperate fully, and he turned into a key, pivotal witness against Moore.
And Smith's cooperation led directly to Moore's most desperate and audacious scheme yet, to hire a fall guy for the murder.
By January 2010, the pressure was immense. The walls were closing in. So she contacted Gregory Smith and asked him, point blank, if he knew anyone who would be willing to take responsibility for Shakespeare's killing for a fee of $50,000.
She was actively recruiting a scapegoat to confess and halt the investigation in its tracks.
That's exactly what she was doing.
And Smith facilitated this, introducing Moore to a man named Mike Smith, who was actually an undercover officer with the Lake Wales Police Department.
Right. And the source material provides rich detail on this sting operation. Moore agreed to pay the undercover officer $50,000 if he would claim responsibility for the murder. The officer, playing his role perfectly, explained that in order for his story to be convincing to law enforcement, he needed specific, credible information.
Namely, the location of the body.
And the murder weapon.
And in a chilling act of self-incrimination, Moore revealed everything.
She led the officer right to the truth. On January 25, 2010, Dee Dee Moore showed Gregory Smith and the undercover officer the exact location, the concrete slab under which Shakespeare was buried in Plant City.
She took them there.
She took them right there. And not only that, but she also provided Gregory Smith with the murder weapon, a .38 Smith & Wesson revolver.
She handed over the physical evidence.
She handed over the body's location and the instrument of the crime to the man she thought was her hired killer. This act, caught by the undercover officer, it completely sealed her fate.
Before we move on to the final judicial process, we have to look again at Moore's history because it really contextualizes the theatrical nature of this entire scheme.
Her capacity for elaborate staging was clearly a behavioral pattern. It was something she relied on whenever she faced financial difficulty.
And the sources detail a prior scheme.
They do. A scheme where she attempted to prevent a vehicle repossession. And the lengths she went to were just astounding. She hit the car, she taped her own wrists, she threw herself from someone else's car, and then fabricated this story, claiming she had been kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and carjacked.
She even submitted to a rape exam.
She did, to bolster her false claims. She eventually pleaded no contest to the charges related to that incident and just received probation.
So this shows that when money was on the line, Moore's immediate response was not panic. It was a spectacular commitment to a lie. A theatrical production designed to deceive authorities and avoid accountability.
Her actions in the Shakespeare case were simply an escalation, a far more deadly escalation of this established criminal pattern.
With that sting operation complete, the end was near.
The evidence gathered during the undercover operation was just overwhelming. It provided investigators with the location of the victim and the instrument of his death. Moore was taken into custody shortly thereafter.
What were the immediate charges she faced?
Police arrested her on February 2, 2010. She was initially charged with accessory after the fact, and a judge set her bond at $1 million. But as the evidence solidified, including the clear premeditation suggested by the burial site and the purchase of the weapon, the charges escalated dramatically.
To first-degree murder.
She was formally charged with first-degree murder on February 19, 2010. She pleaded not guilty in March of that year, attempting to maintain her narrative of innocence throughout the entire pretrial process.
The trial must have been incredibly complicated, tracing that financial shell game and the massive web of lies she wove.
It was. It was an extensive trial lasting several weeks in Hillsborough County, Florida. The prosecution successfully used the financial records, the testimony of Gregory Smith, and, of course, the recordings from the undercover officer to just completely dismantle Moore's defense.
And the jury.
The jury found her guilty of first-degree murder on December 10, 2012.
And the sentence ensured that she could never victimize anyone again.
The court recognized the severity of the planned, predatory nature of this crime. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
And there was more.
There was. Due to her possession and use of the specific murder weapon, that .38 Smith & Wesson revolver, during a violent felony, she received an additional minimum sentence of 25 years. This was absolute finality.
Even while awaiting trial, her focus remained, shockingly, on how to profit from the notoriety of the crime itself.
It just demonstrates the deep entrenchment of her self-interest. While she was incarcerated and awaiting trial in the Hillsborough County Jail, Moore was featured on the television show Lock Up in 2011.
And during that appearance,
she continued to deny all charges. But critically, she stated that she planned on selling the rights to her own story.
Why?
She suggested she needed to raise $200,000 to pay for a lawyer who she hoped could secure her release. So even in prison, the financial scheme continued, just in a different form.
The details of this case, involving extreme wealth, cold calculation, and heartbreaking betrayal, ensured it became a nationally recognized cautionary tale.
The media coverage was enormous, and it has been enduring. This story was the subject of the e-program Curse of the Lottery. Parts of an episode of Lottery changed my life. It was heavily featured on financial crime shows like American Greed and true crime investigations like Deadly Women and Snapped.
And it continues today.
It does. More recently, the exploration of the deception has continued on platforms like Hulu's Web of Death, Peacock's Buried in the Backyard, and the 2020 special Unlucky Numbers. This ensures Abraham Shakespeare's plight remains in the public consciousness, not just as a murder, but as a severe warning about the attraction of wealth.
So we circle back to the devastating outcome. The sources confirm that by the time Dee Dee Moore was arrested in January 2010, the money that Abraham Shakespeare had won, the money that had destroyed his life, was completely gone. The sheriff's assessment was chilling in its simplicity. The lottery money is gone now.
It is the ultimate tragedy of transactional human nature. Abraham Shakespeare was already struggling with the psychological burden and the isolation of sudden wealth. He sought a manager, a partner, or, maybe just a shield. Instead, he found a professional con artist who saw his desperation as a green light for exploitation.
She systematically stripped him of his financial identity through those complex legal maneuvers with the LLC.
And then she eliminated him once his value was reduced to nothing more than a liability.
There is an almost unbearable irony in his earlier expression that he would have been better off broke. That financial windfall was not a dream realized. It was an invisible timer counting down to his end.
And that reflection is so critical. He was a good man who was simply unprepared for the social chaos that $17 million generates. His fate was sealed the moment the money defined his value to others.
He was murdered not for who he was, but purely for what he possessed.
The wealth transformed him into an object. And objects, in the mind of a predator like Dee Dee Moore, are disposable once their value has been extracted.
This exploration of Abraham Shakespeare's life leaves us with a really painful thought. We've seen how the wealth instantly rewired the dynamics of every relationship he had. It raises a question about trust and protection. If sudden wealth instantly attracts the most predatory individuals, what societal mechanisms or personal boundaries are required to protect the vulnerable person underneath all the dollar signs? It forces you to consider how quickly a life's worth can be measured, defined, and ultimately extinguished by sheer greed.